It's a little late coming, but at last here's the third and final part of my series exploring The Last of Us Left Behind and its representation of female characters. In my previous videos, I explored ways the game challenges disempowered, passive, and hypersexualized depictions of femininity through its female leads. In today's video, I'll examine the extent to which Left Behind challenges the gender stereotype of the final girl. The final girl is a term coined by academic Carroll Clover in her book Men, Women and Chainsaws. Born from her analysis of slasher films, it's used to describe a common female archetype within the horror genre, that of the archetypal survivor or female victim hero. The final girl is the one character left alive at the film's conclusion, having successfully defeated or escaped from the villain. Think Laurie Strode from Halloween, or Ripley from Alien. The final girl is a character possessing traits like resilience and resourcefulness, and while clearly vulnerable and afraid of the dark forces she's up against, she ultimately triumphs. And due to her delicate balance between action hero and damsel in distress, she's also seen as a device through which an adolescent male viewer can identify. I'll delve more into what exactly comprises a final girl as I continue, but the main thrust of my argument in this video is that, for all its contesting of ubiquitous gender tropes, Left Behind actually conforms to this prevailing depiction of women through its portrayal of Ellie, and here's how. One term Clover uses to describe the final girl is intelligent and resourceful in a pinch. They tend to rely on their ingenuity as opposed to their raw strength as a means of besting their antagonist. And through the game's level design and mechanics, Left Behind's designers seem to encourage the acting out of these same traits within Ellie. Her ingenuity is emphasised in the Colorado segments, for instance, when the player controls Ellie as she siphons petrol out of abandoned vehicles, while defending herself against waves of infected enemies all vying for her blood. That a teenager should possess such technical know-how, even in a post-apocalyptic world where children undoubtedly grow up quicker, would seem to illustrate a resourceful nature that's uncommon in many video game characters of this age. Additionally, the designer's level curation encourages a style of combat highlighting Ellie's resourcefulness. Towards the end of the game, Ellie finds herself outnumbered by both human and infected enemy types. The designers compensate for this, however, by littering items like bricks and bottles around the playing field. When one of these items is thrown by Ellie, the infected, who remain dormant until stimulated by sound, awake and attack the human enemies. These design decisions, encouraging the pitting of enemy factions against one another, imply a quick-witted streak to Ellie, who's able to use the limited resources available to her in an inventive manner. It's notable that Left Behind actively encourages the pitting of factions in a way that its predecessor, The Last of Us, didn't, and The Last of Us was a game featuring, for the most part, a male protagonist. According to Clover, part of the final girl's appeal for the adolescent male viewer is the admiration she elicits through the quality of her fight, her capacity to survive what has come to seem unsurvivable. That a combat opportunity should exist like the one just mentioned calls to mind the inventive survivability of which Clover speaks. Earlier, I mentioned that the final girl is a character through which an adolescent male viewer can identify, or, as Clover puts it, she is a congenial double for the adolescent male. The reason, Clover argues, for having a female enroll as the hero in a horror story is that she can behave in ways deemed socially unacceptable for men, i.e. screaming and crying, and so appeal to the masochistic pleasures sought by the viewer. That said, she must appear androgynous enough to avoid disturbing the structures of male competence. In other words, should she appear too feminine, adolescent male fans will be put off and won't be able to overcome their resistance to transgender identification. So, if final girls are androgynous male surrogates, in what way then does Ellie conform to this? Let's look at a couple of examples. Firstly, while admittedly fairly subtle, one means by which Ellie's femininity is downplayed is through the game's environmental art. In one section of Left Behind, Ellie and Riley pass through a series of dilapidated apartment buildings, and in one flat, graffiti lies scrawled across a wall showing a list of male names, underneath which can be found Ellie and Riley's. This graffiti suggests the girls prefer the company of boys, which is then reinforced through a subsequent exchange where Riley asks, "What about Tino and the rest of the guys? How are they doing?" The apparent masculinity of the girls is further supported when we consider the location of the graffiti, appearing in an area coded as out of bounds in the game's universe. Because it's made clear to the player that this area is off limits, the environmental art stands as testament to the adventurous, rebellious spirits of those who dared enter the apartment. And, since women in games are often portrayed as passive, any evidence to the contrary, like this graffiti, helps to masculinize them. Ellie's androgyny is further emphasized through the game's narrative structure. Clover speaks of the phallicization that occurs in a slasher film's denouement, where the final girl grows in power before symbolically castrating her aggressor by defeating him, and in so doing is made more masculine herself. We see Ellie's narrative arc echo that of the final girl as she too begins at a disadvantage to her male adversaries, before ultimately reigning triumphant. For example, in the lead up to the final showdown, we witness the condescending manner through which Ellie's adversaries speak of her. "What the hell are we doing here?" says one. "Who gives a fuck about that old man and a little girl?" The dramatic irony in their words soon becomes evident, however, when, moments later, we see Ellie standing over their dead bodies, announcing, "If anyone's alive, don't even think about surprising me. You'll end up like your friends." Ellie reigns victorious, empowered, and phallicized. That's it for my analysis of The Last of Us Left Behind's representation of gender. Whether it be through mechanics used to empower its female characters, its refusal to sexualize women through its costume design, or animations used to dispute female passivity, there are numerous ways in which the game offers a more progressive depiction of women than other games within the action-adventure genre. But there are also some well-worn stereotypes to which its characters do conform, like the final girl cliché. Overall, however, I'd argue that the game deserves to be commended for its representation of women, and that it challenges far more gender stereotypes than it adheres to.